A silent horse and a heartfelt final request in the middle of the courtroom hide a secret that could bring everything crashing down, but no one was ready for what lay beneath the saddle. The morning in Oak Ridge dawned differently. The sky, covered by low, dense clouds, seemed to embrace the colonial buildings with an unusual melancholy. The irregular stones of the historic streets reflected the grey of the firmament, while residents walked with heads bowed, as if sharing a painful secret. On the hill, away from the tourist centre, the Institute for the Visually Impaired kept its curtains drawn. The place that used to vibrate with voices, laughter, and the sound of canes tapping the floor was now immersed in a disturbing silence. Staff moved through the corridors like shadows, exchanging glances heavy with unspoken meanings. "It's been a week now," whispered Martha, the receptionist, as she saw Ryan cross the main entrance. Ryan Anderson, 32, blind since the age of 12, due to an accident, was one of the Institute's first graduates. Today he worked as a volunteer and mobility instructor. His usually serene face showed signs of sleepless nights. "How are things around here?" he asked, adjusting his dark glasses, while his cane probed the already familiar path. "The same heavy atmosphere. Nobody can believe it." Martha lowered her voice even further. "Stephen called an extraordinary meeting for this afternoon." Ryan nodded, feeling his stomach tighten. Stephen Mitchell, the new interim director, was occupying spaces with disturbing speed. Each day brought new changes, new procedures, new rules. "Any news about Anthony?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds before Martha answered. "They say he made a special request to the court. He wants to see Sunshine." The name of the guide horse made Ryan straighten his posture. Sunshine wasn't just a support animal for Anthony Sullivan, the former director now in preventive custody, accused of embezzlement. The horse was a symbol of the Institute, a living example of the revolutionary methodology that had made the place a national reference. "Where is Sunshine now?" asked Ryan, already imagining the worst. "He was transferred to that estate on the other side of the mountain. Stephen said it would be better for the animal's well-being, away from all this situation." Martha's words were interrupted by firm footsteps in the hallway. The high heel striking against the wooden floor revealed who it was before she even spoke. "Good morning, Ryan." Claire Mitchell's voice had that artificial politeness that didn't hide her true nature. "What a surprise to see you here so early." Claire was Stephen's sister, but different from him in almost every aspect. She had broken ties with the family years ago, but curiously reappeared in town right after Anthony's arrest. "I came to check on my students," Ryan replied, maintaining a cordial tone. "With so many changes, they need some stability." Of course, Claire agreed without real interest. "By the way, did you hear about Anthony's absurd request? He wants to see a horse," as if that were a priority for a man in his situation. Something in the way she pronounced those words hit Ryan like a blow. There was contempt, but also a trace of poorly disguised nervousness. "Sunshine is not just a horse," he responded calmly. "Those who know Anthony understand what he means to him." The reception phone rang, saving them from a larger confrontation. Claire walked away with a half smile, and Ryan continued on his way to the classroom where he taught. But his mind was elsewhere. Instead of preparing materials for his students, he took out his cell phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in weeks. "Lucy, it's me, Ryan. We need to talk about Sunshine." On the other end of the line, the hesitant voice of Anthony's former secretary seemed to come alive at the mention of the horse. "Meet me at the Harbour Cafe in half an hour. And Ryan, come alone." The Harbour Cafe, a small establishment by Oak Ridge Bay, was known for its discretion. Tables set far apart from each other, and the constant noise of the sea created the perfect environment for conversations that no one else should hear. Ryan arrived first, guiding himself precisely between the tables. He knew the place so well that he didn't need help. He ordered a strong coffee while waiting, savoring the salty aroma coming from the water. 20 minutes later, the soft sound of hesitant footsteps announced Lucy's arrival. "Sorry I'm late," she said, pulling out a chair. Her voice sounded different, lower and more cautious. "Since I left the Institute, I've been avoiding public places." Lucy Parker had been Anthony's secretary for more than 8 years. When he was arrested, she turned in her resignation letter the same day without explanation and practically disappeared from town. "Thank you for coming," Ryan replied, extending his hand across the table. Lucy squeezed it briefly, a gesture that carried the weight of recent distrust. "How are you?" "Surviving." She sighed, ordering tea when the waiter approached. "But you didn't call me to talk about my life, did you? It's about Anthony's request to see sunshine." Lucy was silent for a few seconds. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I knew this would happen. He's sending a signal." "What kind of signal?" "In the last few months before everything happened, Anthony was different. He spent hours in the stable with Sunshine, modified his saddle 3 times, changed the horseshoe, redesigned the collar." She paused, as if organizing scattered thoughts. "At the time, I thought it was just stress from the budget cuts the ministry announced. But now—" "You think he hid something?" Ryan leaned forward, feeling his heart race. "Something related to the accusations?" "I think he foresaw what would happen." Lucy lowered her voice even more. "A week before he was taken, Anthony asked me to keep something, said it was just a precaution." She opened her purse and took out a small fabric bundle. She slid it across the table to Ryan's hand. "It's a note in Braille. I found it sewn into his old riding vest." Ryan unwrapped the fabric and ran his fingers over the paper delicately. His eyebrows rose as he decoded the message. Truth, memory, protection, and a coordinate. He furrowed his brow. "Does this make any sense to you?" "Not exactly, but I know it's related to the project he was secretly working on. Something called Aurora." A noisy group of tourists entered the cafe, causing both to immediately fall silent. When the noise diminished, Ryan continued, "We need to find Sunshine before anything else. Do you know exactly where he is?" "At an estate belonging to the Mitchell family on the other side of the ridge, a place called Golden Meadows." "I know the area," Ryan nodded. "I grew up around there before the accident. My father worked at the farms in the region. But the place is guarded, Ryan. It's not like walking in and out of the Institute." "There's something else you're not telling me, isn't there, Lucy?" She took a deep breath, like someone finally surrendering after a long internal battle. "The day Anthony was taken, I was in his office. I saw when the police arrived, and before they entered, he whispered something to me. He said, 'When everything seems lost, remember that light always comes from the east.' At the time, I thought it was just desperation talking, but later, 'The east, where the sun rises,'" murmured Ryan, a sudden understanding illuminating his face. "Sunshine, the name wasn't chosen by chance." "Exactly, and there's more. That same day, Stephen showed up at the Institute as if he already knew everything. In less than 24 hours, the accounting team was replaced and various documents were relocated. Doesn't that seem strange to you?" The waiter brought their drinks, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When they resumed speaking, the tone was even more reserved. "We need to act quickly," decided Ryan. "If Anthony hid something with Sunshine, it's no coincidence that the animal was the first to be removed from the Institute. But how will we enter that estate without being seen?" "I know someone who can help us." Ryan took his cell phone from his pocket. "Someone who knows those paths better than anyone, and who, like us, never believed in Anthony's guilt." "Who?" "Mrs. Eleanor, the former director of the Institute and Anthony's mentor. She's been secluded since everything happened, but I know where to find her." Lucy hesitated, a shadow of doubt crossing her face. "Can we trust her? These days, I don't know who to believe anymore." "If we can't trust Mrs. Eleanor, then we can't trust anyone," Ryan stated with conviction. "She dedicated 50 years of her life to that institute. She was the one who taught Anthony everything he knew." "All right," Lucy finally agreed. "When?" "Tonight. The longer we wait, the greater the chances of losing whatever Anthony has hidden." They finished their drinks in silence, each lost in their own thoughts and fears. As they said goodbye at the cafe door, Lucy gripped Ryan's arm with unexpected strength. "If we're right, Ryan, we're not just looking for evidence. We're challenging powerful people who won't hesitate to stop us." "I know," he replied, feeling the weight of that truth. But if we don't do this, who will? The small stone house was almost completely hidden by the vegetation growing without control. Situated in the highest part of town, away from the curious eyes of tourists, the place seemed abandoned at first glance. Only a thin thread of smoke coming from the chimney betrayed the presence of life. Ryan and Lucy arrived at nightfall, following a narrow and steep trail that few knew about. The night was clear, with a crescent moon illuminating the path sufficiently for Lucy to guide Ryan through the most difficult stretches. "Are you sure she still lives here?" asked Lucy, breathless from the climb. "Mrs. Eleanor would never leave this place," Ryan replied with conviction. "It was the first property bought by the Institute, even before it officially became an institution. This is where the first class for blind children in Oak Ridge operated." They reached the small yard of irregular stones in front of the house. There was no doorbell, just an old bronze bell hanging next to the solid wooden door. Ryan rang it 3 times, producing a melodious sound that echoed along the hillside. There was a long silence, and for a moment Lucy thought perhaps the house was really empty. Then, the soft sound of approaching footsteps made her heart race. The door opened slowly, revealing an elderly woman with white hair tied in an impeccable bun. Despite her advanced age, Eleanor Myers maintained an erect posture and lively, perceptive eyes. Upon recognizing the visitors, her serious expression softened minimally. "I was expecting you," she said simply, opening the door wider. "Come in, before someone sees you." The interior of the house was a contrast to its external appearance. Everything was in perfect order, from the shiny wooden floor to the carefully arranged antique furniture. Books in braille and in print occupied practically every available surface. "Sit down," she indicated a worn leather sofa near the fireplace. "I'll prepare some tea. The night promises to be long." While Mrs. Eleanor headed to the kitchen, Ryan and Lucy exchanged looks of surprise. "How did she know we were coming?" whispered Lucy. "Mrs. Eleanor always knows everything," replied Ryan, a slight smile curving his lips. "That was the first thing I learned when I arrived at the Institute." The elderly woman returned minutes later with a tray containing a teapot, cups, and some homemade cookies. She served the tea with precise movements and then sat in an armchair facing the two, evaluating them for a few moments before speaking. "So you finally realized." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Realized what exactly?" inquired Ryan. "That Anthony would never divert a single penny from the Institute." Mrs. Eleanor's voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. "And that his request to see Sunshine has nothing to do with sentimentality." Lucy leaned forward, her hands tightening around the cup. "Do you know about the note about Project Aurora?" A gleam of approval appeared in the elderly woman's eyes. "I see I didn't waste my time training you," she said, taking a sip of tea before continuing. "Project Aurora was conceived almost a decade ago, when the first attempts to take control of the Institute began." "Attempts?" interrupted Ryan, confused. "What attempts?" "The Institute isn't just a rehabilitation center, my dear. It's one of the largest landowners in this region. Land donated, inherited, purchased over decades. Land that today is worth a fortune, especially with the tourist expansion and new real estate projects." "And Anthony knew this," completed Lucy, the pieces starting to fit together in her mind. "He not only knew, but created a system to protect the assets." Mrs. Eleanor carefully placed her cup on the table. Project Aurora was an emergency protocol. If something happened to him, important evidence and documents would be distributed in safe places, with trustworthy people, and with Sunshine, concluded Ryan. "The guide horse is part of the protection system." The elderly woman nodded slowly. "Anthony once told me that the safest place to keep something is where no one would think to look. A trained animal, especially one so close to him, would be perfect." "But what exactly did he hide with Sunshine?" asked Lucy. "That, my young friend, is what we need to discover." Mrs. Eleanor rose with surprising agility for her age and walked to a bookshelf. From there she retrieved a carved wooden box. "Before answering that, I need to show you something." She opened the box on the table. Inside was an antique key of noble appearance, and a hand-drawn map on yellowed paper. This key opens a safe in the basement of the Institute, a safe that very few people know exists, built at the time of the foundation. That's where Anthony kept sensitive documents. "And why are you showing us this now?" asked Ryan, intrigued. "Because you'll need to access it. On the day Anthony was detained, he called me. It was a quick conversation, but meaningful. He just said, 'The sun rises in the east but sets in the west. Remember the safe.'" "West," muttered Lucy. "The coordinate in the note points east, but maybe there's more information in the safe pointing west." "Exactly," agreed Mrs. Eleanor. "I believe Anthony divided the evidence, part with Sunshine, part in the safe. It's our strategy to ensure that, even if they found one, the other would remain secure." Ryan ran his fingers over the key, feeling its engravings. "How will we enter the Institute now? The place is practically under quarantine since Stephen took over." "That's why we need a plan," the elderly woman replied. "And we need to act quickly. Anthony's hearing has been moved up to next week, and Stephen is moving heaven and earth to consolidate his power before then." "First Sunshine, then the safe," decided Ryan. "If we can get both pieces of the puzzle, maybe we can save not just Anthony but the entire Institute." "And how do we get to Sunshine?" questioned Lucy. "Golden Meadows is watched day and night." A mysterious smile appeared on Mrs. Eleanor's lips. "That's why we need help." She walked to the window and made an almost imperceptible gesture. Seconds later, the doorbell rang softly. "Who is it?" asked Ryan, tensing. "Our passage to Golden Meadows," replied the elderly woman, heading to the door. "Someone who knows those lands like the back of his hand, and who has as much interest as we do in finding Sunshine." When the door opened, Lucy couldn't contain an exclamation of surprise. Standing on the threshold with a determined look and simple work clothes was Peter Mitchell, Stephen's estranged cousin and his greatest family feud. "I heard you need to get into my old estate," he said, his deep voice breaking the silence. "I'm in." The night had fully settled when the group left Mrs. Eleanor's house. A gentle wind blew through the trees, creating restless shadows under the moonlight. Peter Mitchell led the way, followed by Lucy and Ryan, while Mrs. Eleanor remained at the house, promising to monitor any suspicious movement at the Institute by phone. "We need to avoid the main road," explained Peter, as they followed an almost invisible trail that snaked along the mountainside. "Since Stephen took control of Golden Meadows, he's installed cameras at all official access points." "How did you find out about Sunshine?" asked Ryan, moving skillfully over the uneven terrain, his cane precisely finding the irregularities in the path. "I have eyes and ears everywhere," replied Peter with a slight smile. "Besides, I worked at that estate my whole life, until Stephen kicked me out 2 years ago. I know every square inch of that land." He paused before adding, "And I always knew Anthony was innocent." Lucy, who until then had maintained a cautious silence, spoke up. "Why are you helping us? The Mitchells don't usually go against family decisions." Peter stopped for a moment, his gaze hardening at the mention of the family name. "Not all Mitchells are the same, Miss Parker. Some of us still have a conscience." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Besides, that land was my mother's. Stephen took it using legal tricks that she, sick and confused, didn't understand. Golden Meadows should rightfully be mine." They resumed walking in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. The trail became narrower as they advanced, forcing them to walk in single file. After almost an hour, Peter signaled for them to stop. "We're approaching the property boundaries," he whispered. "From here on, we need to be extremely cautious." Before them stretched a wide valley, where it was possible to distinguish the silhouette of well-preserved old buildings. Golden Meadows was named for the dozens of trees surrounding the main house and annexes, creating a majestic scene even in the night's gloom. "The stable is behind the main house," informed Peter, pointing to an elongated building about 200 meters from where they stood. "There are 2 men doing security, rotating every 4 hours." "How do you know this?" inquired Ryan. "Jack, the stable hand, is still my friend. He passed on all the information about the place's routine." Peter checked his watch. "At 11 p.m., the guard changes. We'll have about 10 minutes while one leaves and the other prepares to take over." "That seems like little time," commented Lucy, apprehensive. "It's enough if we know exactly what we're looking for," replied Ryan. He removed from his pocket the braille note Lucy had given him. "The coordinate indicates a specific point in the stable. We need to reach Sunshine and check the saddle, the horseshoes, and the collar. Those are the only places where Anthony could have hidden something." They waited patiently in the shadows of the trees. When Peter's watch marked exactly 11 p.m., they saw the light of a flashlight moving from the stable toward the main house. It was the first guard leaving. "Now," murmured Peter, guiding them between the trees to the back of the stable. A service door, almost hidden by vegetation, was locked only with a simple external bolt. Peter manipulated it skillfully, and in seconds the door opened noiselessly. The interior of the stable was spacious and well-maintained, with 6 stalls on one side and an open space on the other. The characteristic smell of hay and animals filled their lungs. Only a small lamp left the environment in an orange half-light, sufficient for them not to stumble. "There," pointed Lucy, locating the stall with a sign that read, "Sunshine." The horse, a beautiful specimen with golden coat, raised its head at the sound of movement, its intelligent eyes fixed on the visitors with what seemed to be recognition. "He seems to know who we are," whispered Lucy, amazed. "Sunshine was trained to recognize people by voice and smell," explained Ryan, slowly approaching the stall. "And he knows the sound of my cane perfectly. I was with him and Anthony in countless training sessions." When he reached the front of the stall, Ryan extended his hand, letting the horse smell it. Sunshine whinnied softly and pushed his muzzle against Ryan's fingers in a clear gesture of affection. "Hello, old friend," murmured Ryan, caressing the animal's neck. "We're here to help Anthony. You have something for us, don't you?" While Ryan kept the horse calm, Peter and Lucy entered the stall to examine the equipment. "The saddle is there," pointed Peter to a support on the wall. Lucy approached, examining every inch of the piece with agile fingers and attentive eyes. The saddle seemed ordinary at first glance, but when she turned it, she noticed something strange. "There's something here," she whispered. "A part of the stitching is different. Thicker." Peter took a small pocket knife from his pocket and, careful not to damage the saddle too much, opened the suspicious seam. From inside he extracted a small metal tube, sealed at both ends. "What is this?" he asked, handing the object to Lucy. "I don't know, but it seems—" She tried to twist one of the ends and the tube opened, revealing a flash drive protected by a layer of sealed plastic. "That's it. It's a flash drive." "Shh," warned Ryan, hearing a distant noise. "Someone's coming." The sound of boots approaching made everyone freeze. Peter reacted quickly, putting the tube in his pocket and replacing the saddle on the support. "Behind the door," he instructed in a very low voice, indicating the entrance to the stall. "When he comes in, we go out." The three positioned themselves, barely breathing. The noise of boots suddenly stopped, followed by the sound of a male voice answering a phone. "Yes, Sir Stephen. Everything's quiet here." A pause. No strange movement. The horse is in the stall as always." Another longer pause. "Understood. I'll do the complete round right now." The footsteps resumed, but in the opposite direction, moving away from the stable. "That was close," sighed Lucy, her heart still racing. "We're not done yet," reminded Ryan. "We need to check the horseshoe and the collar. If Anthony divided the evidence, there might be more things hidden." Peter quickly examined the horse's hooves, which remained extraordinarily cooperative. "I don't see anything unusual in the horseshoes," he concluded after a few minutes. "They seem conventional." "The collar, then," suggested Lucy, turning her attention to the wide leather belt that was hanging next to the saddle. Once again, her experienced fingers ran over the object, feeling every detail. At a specific point, she felt a small protuberance under the inner lining. Using Peter's pocket knife, she removed a few stitches and extracted a tiny SD card, the type used in professional cameras. "There's something else," she murmured, continuing to examine the collar. At one end, almost imperceptible, was a small, sealed pocket. From inside, she removed a paper folded several times. "What does it say?" asked Ryan anxiously. "They're coordinates," replied Lucy, unfolding the paper carefully. "And a code. It seems to be for a digital safe." "The Institute. Safe," deduced Ryan. Anthony really did divide the evidence. A sudden noise from outside made them start. "We have to go," urged Peter. "The guard is returning." Quickly, they replaced the collar, petted Sunshine one last time in gratitude, and headed for the back door. Peter closed it silently behind, them repositioning the bolt exactly as it had been before. Using the cover of the trees, they quickly moved away from the property, following the path back the way they had come. Only when they were at a safe distance near the main trail did they allow themselves to relax a bit. "We did it," whispered Lucy, still in disbelief. "Now we need to find out what's on these devices." "And we need to access the safe at the Institute," added Ryan. "If what Mrs. Eleanor said is true, we'll find the other half of the evidence there." "One problem at a time," suggested Peter. "First, let's get back to her house and analyze what we already have." As they walked along the dark trail, Ryan couldn't help but think of Anthony, alone in a cell counting on them to prove his innocence, and of Sunshine, that noble animal who, without knowing, carried with him the key to uncovering the whole truth. Dawn found the small group gathered in Mrs. Eleanor's living room, exhausted but determined. The elderly woman's old computer, clunky but functional, hummed softly as it processed the information from the flash drive and memory card found with Sunshine. "It's all encrypted," announced Peter, who had some knowledge of computer science. "We need passwords to access the files." Lucy rubbed her tired eyes, consulting again the paper with the coordinates and code. "Maybe this code is the password," she suggested, extending the paper to Peter. "Let's try." He typed the alphanumeric sequence, but the system refused access. "It didn't work," he sighed, frustrated. "There must be something we're overlooking," Ryan pondered, his fingers drumming on the wooden table. Suddenly, he straightened in his chair. "Truth, memory, protection, the words from the Braille note." "What do you mean?" asked Lucy. "What if they're not just concepts but indications?" Anthony always loved word games and puzzles. That's how he taught students to develop logical reasoning. Mrs. Eleanor, who had remained silent for some time, nodded slowly. "Ryan is right. Anthony used methods like this even with adults. Words were rarely just words to him." "So what could truth, memory, protection mean in terms of passwords?" questioned Peter. "Perhaps," Ryan furrowed his brow, concentrating. "What if we combine the first letters with the numeric code?" Peter quickly tried the new combination in the system, but again without success. Lucy got up and began to pace the room, thoughtful. "Wait. What if each word is a different password for each device?" She picked up the paper with the code. "We have 3 devices, the flash drive, the SD card, and the Institute safe, and we have 3 words, truth, memory, protection." "Worth a try," agreed Peter, turning his attention back to the computer. After a few attempts, an exclamation of surprise escaped Peter's lips. It worked. Truth opened the flash drive. The computer screen flickered, revealing a series of files organized in folders. Peter clicked on the first one, releasing various documents with official letterheads from the Department of Education and other government entities. "They're contracts," explained Lucy, approaching to read better. "Bidding contracts for works and services at the Institute, dated from the last 3 years. "And what do they show?" asked Ryan, unable to see the screen. "They seem legitimate at first glance, but—" Lucy narrowed her eyes, analyzing the details. "There are inconsistencies in the values. And look at this. They were all signed by different companies, but the business addresses are very similar." "Shell companies," concluded Mrs. Eleanor. "Classic money laundering scheme." Peter opened more files, finding detailed spreadsheets. That compared the real market values with the inflated ones in the contracts. "Anthony was tracking everything," he murmured, amazed. "Every penny diverted, every falsified invoice. And here are the names of those responsible within the department." His voice faltered as he read the next name. "And Stephen Mitchell appears as an intermediary in all transactions." This proves that Anthony was investigating the diversions, not participating in them, Ryan stated with growing hope. "But why didn't he report this before?" questioned Lucy. "Because he needed irrefutable evidence," replied Mrs. Eleanor, "confronting big shots from the department. and a man with Stephen's economic power required much more than suspicions. Peter tried to open the SD card using memory as the password, and again was successful. This time the content was different. Audio recordings, dozens of them, organized by date. "They're recordings of meetings," he stated after listening to some excerpts. Anthony recorded compromising conversations. He selected one of the most recent files and turned up the volume so everyone could hear. Stephen Mitchell's voice sounded clear, without any attempt at disguise. "As soon as I take control of the Institute, we can start the process of reclassifying the land. The real estate project has already been conditionally approved by the City Hall. It's just waiting for the change in leadership to move forward." Another voice, which no one recognized, responded, "And what about Anthony? He would never accept this." "Anthony won't be a problem for much longer," Stephen guaranteed coldly. "The documents we planted in the Institute's accounting are enough to keep him busy for years trying to prove his innocence. By the time he manages, if he manages, we will have transformed that land into the largest tourist complex in Oakridge." The silence that followed the recording was heavy, charged with indignation and paradoxically hope. They finally had proof that Anthony had been the victim of a carefully orchestrated frame-up. "This is shocking," murmured Lucy, her voice choked. "And perfectly aligned with what I always suspected of my cousin," added Peter bitterly. "He always saw the Institute as a hindrance to his plans. That land is worth a fortune to anyone who wants to build resorts and luxury condominiums. We need to take this to the police," decided Ryan. "Not yet," intervened Mrs. Eleanor. "This evidence is important but incomplete. We need what's in the Institute safe to complete the cycle." "You're right," agreed Lucy. "If Anthony divided the evidence, it's because each part complements the other. And we still have the word protection to decipher," reminded Peter. "It must be the safe's password." Ryan stood up, renewed by determination. "We need to enter the Institute tonight, before it's too late. Anthony's hearing is in 2 days." "But the place is heavily guarded now," warned Lucy. "How will we do this?" A slight smile appeared on Mrs. Eleanor's lips. "Leave that to me. I'm still the emeritus former director of the Institute. No one will question my presence there, especially if I say I'm looking for some personal belongings I left in my old office." "Isn't that too risky for you?" worried Ryan. "At my age, young man, I have little left to lose," she replied with a gleam of determination in her eyes. "Besides, no one would suspect an elderly and apparently fragile lady." "Then we have a plan," concluded Peter, closing the computer after saving a copy of all files on a separate device for safety. "Mrs. Eleanor enters the Institute officially, distracting the guards, while we access the basement through the ventilation ducts that I know well, since I maintained them for years. And the safe, how will we know exactly where it is?" questioned Lucy. "It's behind a false wall in Anthony's old office," explained Mrs. Eleanor, heading to a small desk. From a drawer, she removed a detailed map of the Institute. "Here, this X marks the location." While they studied the map and refined the details of the plan, Ryan remained thoughtful, his fingers unconsciously tracing the outline of the Braille note. "There's something more," he finally said, attracting everyone's attention. "Anthony wouldn't divide the evidence just for security. He would do it as part of a larger strategy." "What do you mean?" asked Peter. "I've known Anthony for years. He always thinks several steps ahead. If he created this whole system, it wasn't just to protect evidence, but to use it in a calculated way." "Like chess," observed Mrs. Eleanor, nodding in understanding. "Each piece moved at the exact moment for checkmate." "Exactly," confirmed Ryan, "and I think the moment is approaching." Outside, the sun was already high in the sky. A new day had begun in Oakridge, apparently the same as all others. But for that small group gathered in the stone house, it was the beginning of the countdown to the revelation of a truth that would forever change the fate of the Institute and everyone involved. Night fell over Oakridge like a black velvet mantle dotted with stars. The Institute, imposing in its silence, stood out in the darkness, its sparsely illuminated windows creating ghostly patterns on the stone walls. According to the plan, Mrs. Eleanor arrived alone, walking slowly with the aid of her cane. Impeccably dressed as always, she carried a small leather valise that she declared contained personal documents and some mementos she wished to recover. "Good evening, August," she greeted the security guard at the entrance with familiarity. "How is your mother? Still having knee problems?" The man, initially tense at seeing a visitor at that hour, visibly relaxed upon recognizing her. "Mrs. Eleanor, what a surprise." His tone was respectful. "Mom is better, thank you for asking, but you know we need authorization for visitors. After hours, especially now with this whole situation." "Ah, yes, I understand perfectly," she replied with a complacent smile. "That's why I called Stephen earlier. He didn't tell you? How careless of him." Her tone made it impossible to determine if she was being ironic or sincere. The guard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the possibility of contradicting both such a respected figure and potentially his new boss. "Well, I didn't receive any communication, but being you..." He quickly checked his phone, as if expecting to find some missed message. "I believe there's no problem, but I need to accompany you. Those are the new rules." "Naturally," she agreed gracefully. "In fact, I would be grateful for the company. These corridors seem so much larger and more frightening at night." While Mrs. Eleanor entered through the main access, deliberately drawing all attention to herself, three figures moved silently around the back of the grounds. Ryan, Lucy, and Peter approached the small building that housed the Institute's central ventilation system. "Here," whispered Peter, locating a grate almost hidden by vegetation. "This duct leads directly to the basement, passing through the first floor where Anthony's office is." With skill born of practice, he removed the grate and signaled for the others to follow him. The space was tight and dusty, but navigable. Peter led the way, followed by Lucy and, lastly, Ryan, who moved with surprising dexterity in the confined space. "How do you know this system so well?" asked Lucy in a low voice as they crawled. "I worked on maintenance at the Institute for years, before Stephen pushed me out," explained Peter. "When the building was renovated, I supervised the installation of the entire air system. I know every connection, every outlet." Inside the building, Mrs. Eleanor walked calmly through the corridors, making comments about the changes at the Institute, strategically prolonging the tour. August, the security guard, seemed increasingly relaxed in the presence of the elderly woman, whose stories about the early days of the institution kept him completely entertained. "And that's the new administrative sector?" she asked, pointing to an area she clearly didn't need to visit. "Yes, ma'am, it was all renovated last month." "Fascinating. Can we take a look? I've always been curious about the use of that space." While Mrs. Eleanor followed her distraction plan on the upper floor, the trio in the ventilation system reached a critical point. "This is it," indicated Peter, pointing to a grate that gave onto a deserted corridor on the first floor. "Anthony's office is the third door on the right." Carefully, he removed the grate and verified that the area was indeed empty before jumping into the corridor, then helping Lucy and Ryan do the same. Moving like shadows, they quickly reached the indicated door. "Locked," Lucy confirmed after testing the doorknob. Peter removed a small case with tools from his pocket. "Leave it to me," he said, kneeling in front of the lock. After a few minutes of careful manipulation, a satisfying click was heard. Done. Anthony's office remained practically untouched, as if time had frozen on the day of his arrest. Organized folders filled the shelves, photographs of the Institute, and classes graduated over the years decorated the walls, and the desk was clean and tidy, except for a ceramic pencil holder made by some student. "The false wall," reminded Ryan, moving with confidence through the familiar space. "Mrs. Eleanor said it's behind the cedar bookcase." Peter and Lucy directed themselves to the indicated bookcase, a massive piece that seemed impossible to move. "How are we going to shift it?" asked Lucy, concerned. "We don't need to," replied Ryan, approaching and running his fingers along the edge of the bookcase with precision. "Anthony showed me once. There's a mechanism here." Upon pressing a specific point in the ornate frame, a soft hum was heard, and the bookcase slid a few inches to the side, revealing a small gap in the wall. "Amazing," murmured Peter, impressed. "Anthony Was always fascinated by alternative security systems, explained Ryan with a slight smile. He used to say that the best protection is the one no one suspects exists. In the revealed space embedded in the wall was a medium-sized digital safe. Its panel requested a 6-digit password. Protection, said Lucy immediately. It must be the third keyword. Ryan nodded and approached the panel. With sure fingers he typed the word. The safe emitted a negative beep. It didn't work, he stated, frowning. Maybe it's something related to protection, not the word itself, suggested Peter. Lucy bit her lip, thoughtful. When was the Institute founded? 1976, replied Ryan promptly. What if we try that date? After all, the Institute was created to protect and empower people with visual impairments. Ryan typed the numbers. Again, the safe refused. We're overthinking, he concluded, after a moment. Anthony always said that the best passwords are those that only the owner would consider important. He was silent for a few seconds, his mind searching through memories of conversations with his mentor. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with understanding. Aurora, he said softly. The project name, but how to transform this into numbers? The sequence on a telephone keypad, suggested Peter. Each letter corresponds to a number. Quickly, they converted the letters into digits. 287672. Ryan typed the sequence and, to everyone's relief, the safe emitted an affirmative beep before unlocking with a metallic click. Inside, they found a robust folder, a Braille notebook, and a small electronic device that none of them immediately recognized. It looks like an old voice recorder, commented Peter, examining the apparatus. It's more than that, corrected Ryan, touching the device with reverence. It's a prototype, developed here at the Institute. It records and automatically translates to digital Braille. Anthony and I worked on it for almost 2 years. Lucy opened the folder, revealing a meticulous collection of documents. Original contracts, meeting minutes, internal memos, and most importantly, a detailed dossier on suspicious financial transactions involving Stephen Mitchell and his associates. This is pure dynamite, she evaluated, quickly leafing through the pages. There's proof here that Stephen not only framed Anthony, but has been diverting public funds for years through a network of shell companies. Peter examined some of the documents. And there's more. Look at this. A detailed plan to convert the Institute's land into a luxury resort as soon as he gained legal control of the property. The notebook, reminded Ryan, picking up the Braille item. His fingers traveled over the pages quickly. These are Anthony's personal notes. He documented every step of the investigation he was secretly conducting. And here, his voice faltered for a moment. He knew he would be arrested. He had been preparing for it for months. The distant sound of voices in the corridor made everyone freeze. We need to go, urged Peter, putting everything back in the safe except the most important documents, which Lucy put in her bag. We can't leave the rest, she protested. We have no choice, replied Peter, closing the safe and reactivating the mechanism that slid the bookcase back into its original position. The voices are getting closer. Wait, asked Ryan, quickly heading to Anthony's desk. From an apparently ordinary drawer, he retrieved a small golden key. This opens the back door of the library. We can exit through there. The voices were getting closer. They left the office stealthily, locking the door behind them. Instead of returning through the ventilation system, they followed the corridor in the opposite direction, where a discreet door led to the Institute's library. Among the imposing shelves filled with Braille books and audiobooks, they found the doctor indicated by Ryan. The golden key turned without resistance in the lock, revealing an exit that led to the side gardens. And Mrs. Eleanor? Worried Lucy when they were already outside. She'll know how to get out, assured Ryan. She knows this place better than any of us. They moved away quickly, using the shadows of the trees as cover. Only when they were at a safe distance on the trail leading back to Mrs. Eleanor's house did they allow themselves to breathe more easily. We did it, said Lucy, still not completely believing. Now we have everything we need, agreed Peter. Ryan, however, maintained a thoughtful expression. Not everything. There's still one piece missing in this puzzle. What piece? Questioned Lucy. The last link Anthony mentioned in the recordings, something related to the request to see Sunshine. But we've already recovered what was hidden with the horse, argued Peter, confused. Yes, but why would he make the request now? Why insist on seeing Sunshine precisely when his hearing is approaching? Ryan seemed to be talking more to himself than to the others. There's something else, something we haven't yet realized. They continued walking in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Above them, the moon shone intensely, illuminating the path back, a path that, they all felt, was far from over. The conference room at the Morgan & Associates law office was austere and impersonal. The air conditioning kept the environment excessively cold, as if it wanted to freeze the emotions of its occupants as well. Around the oval, dark wood table, Ryan, Lucy, Peter and Mrs. Eleanor waited tensely for the lawyer's arrival. On the ECE table, organized in meticulous piles, were all the documents recovered from the Institute safe, printed copies of the files from the flash drive, and transcriptions of the recordings found on the SD card. The result of 2 days of intensive work to organize and make sense of all the evidence. She's late, observed Peter, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Rebecca Morgan is never late, replied Mrs. Eleanor calmly. If she's not here yet, it's because she has a good reason. As if invoked by the elderly woman's words, the door opened and a middle-aged woman, dressed in an impeccable grey suit, entered with firm steps. Rebecca Morgan carried a folder under her arm and an expression that mixed determination and caution. "I apologize for the delay," she said, sitting at the head of the table without ceremony. "I had to verify some last-minute information." She looked at each of those present before continuing. "The hearing has been rescheduled for tomorrow, at 10 in the morning." "What?" Lucy was surprised. "But it was scheduled for the day after." "Tomorrow." "Exactly," confirmed Rebecca, opening her folder. "It's a common tactic when one wants to minimize press presence or reduce the defense's preparation time. Fortunately, we're ready." Her gaze fell on the piles of documents. "At least I hope we are. Show me what you've got." During the next hour, they presented all the evidence collected. Rebecca listened attentively, making occasional notes and, from time to time, nodding in approval. "Impressive," she commented when the presentation ended. "You've gathered a set of evidence that not only exonerates Anthony, but exposes the entire corruption network orchestrated by Stephen Mitchell." She paused, as if pondering her next words. "However, something crucial is still missing." "What?" asked Ryan, leaning forward. "A living witness," explained Rebecca. "Someone who is willing to confirm in court Stephen's direct involvement in the diversions. Without this, his defense can claim that the documents were tampered with or that the recordings were taken out of context." A heavy silence fell over the room. No one seemed willing to verbalize the obvious problem. Who would dare to testify against someone as powerful as Stephen Mitchell? It was Mrs. Eleanor who finally broke the silence. "There is someone," she said, her voice firm despite her age. "Claire Mitchell, Stephen's sister." "Claire?" repeated Peter, surprised. "But she broke with the family years ago. I doubt she knows anything about her brother's current business." "Don't underestimate family ties, even broken ones," replied the elderly woman. "Claire and Stephen may have grown apart, but she always kept her eyes and ears attentive to his activities. She was the one who first alerted me about Stephen's intentions regarding the Institute. If this is true," pondered Rebecca, "we need to locate her immediately." "She's staying at the Tides Inn in the Historic Center," informed Mrs. Eleanor. "She arrived in town 2 weeks ago, shortly after Anthony's arrest." "An interesting coincidence," observed the lawyer, making a new note. "Lucy, could you and Peter go talk to her while I review these documents in more detail?" "I can go alone," Lucy quickly offered. "Peter knows the material better. He'll be more useful here, explaining the technical details." Rebecca nodded in agreement, and Lucy stood up, gathering her purse. "One thing still bothers me," commented Ryan, as Lucy was already heading to the door. "Why is Anthony insisting so much on seeing Sunshine now? What else could the horse reveal that we haven't already discovered?" "Maybe it's just a symbolic gesture," suggested Rebecca. A man about to face a trial wanting to say goodbye to a loyal friend. No, Ryan disagreed vehemently. I know Anthony too well. There's something more to this request. Mrs. Eleanor, observed the young man with a penetrating look. What are you thinking, Ryan? I remember something Anthony told me once during a lesson on non-verbal communication. He was talking about how animals, especially horses, are capable of carrying messages on their own bodies without realizing it. Ryan furrowed his brow, concentrating. What if Sunshine not only carried something hidden in his equipment, but in himself? What do you mean? Questioned Peter, intrigued. I don't know exactly, but... Ryan stood up, agitated. I need to see Sunshine before the hearing. We need to bring him to the courthouse. That's impossible, intervened Rebecca, pragmatic. We can't simply show up with a horse in the middle of a judicial hearing. Actually, pondered Mrs. Eleanor, perhaps we can. Anthony's official request to see Sunshine was forwarded to the judge. If approved, the animal would be brought to court tomorrow. And was it approved? Asked Peter. I don't know yet, replied Rebecca, checking her tablet. Decisions on inmate. Requests are only published at the end of the day. We'll know in a few hours. Meanwhile, said Ryan, determined, we need to be prepared for both possibilities. If the request is denied, we'll find another way to deliver our message. Lucy, who had remained silent by the door, finally spoke. I'll talk to Claire Mitchell. Right now. If she really knows something that can help us, we need her cooperation immediately. When Lucy left, Ryan turned to Mrs. Eleanor. I need you to tell me everything you know about the modifications Anthony made to Sunshine in recent months. Every detail could be crucial. The elderly woman nodded gravely. He really was obsessed with details that many would consider insignificant. He insisted on changing the horse's shoe 3 times in 2 months, always with the same farrier. A man named Jack, from the old forge near the wharf. Jack, repeated Peter, remembering. The same one who still works at Golden Meadows as a stable hand. He passed me the information about the place's routine. Then he's trustworthy, concluded Ryan. We need to talk to him immediately. I'll go, offered Peter, already standing up. I've known Jack for years. He'll trust me. Meanwhile, in the historic center of Oakridge, Lucy walked hurriedly over the irregular stone streets toward the Tides Inn. The place was small and welcoming, with blue colonial windows and flower pots hanging on the white facade. At the reception, a young woman informed her that Claire Mitchell had left early, without specifying when she would return. Disappointed, Lucy left a note asking Claire to contact her urgently as soon as she returned. When she was about to leave, she noticed a familiar figure walking on the opposite sidewalk, Stephen Mitchell, accompanied by 2 severe-looking men. Instinctively, Lucy stepped back into the inn, observing through the window. Stephen seemed agitated, gesturing emphatically while talking on the phone. The men at his side remained alert, constantly looking around, like sentinels. Something wrong, ma'am? Asked the receptionist, noting her behavior. No, nothing, Lucy replied quickly. I was just wondering if, by any chance, did Mrs. Mitchell mention where she was going? The young woman hesitated, clearly reluctant to share information about a guest. Normally I couldn't say, but considering you left a note, she lowered her voice. She mentioned something about visiting the old Mitchell mansion on Flower Street, said she needed to recover something important before leaving. Leaving? Repeated Lucy, alarmed. Is she leaving town? She booked a boat passage to Portland. It leaves at 6 this evening. Lucy thanked her for the information and quickly exited through the inn's back door, avoiding being seen by Stephen. Her heart was racing as she typed a message to Ryan, informing him of the new developments. Back at the lawyer's office, Rebecca was receiving an important call. Yes? I understand. Yes, we'll be prepared. She hung up the phone and looked at Ryan and Mrs. Eleanor, who were anxiously waiting. The request was approved. Sunshine will be brought to court tomorrow at 9:30, 30 minutes before the hearing. Great, said Ryan, a spark of hope lighting up his face. Now we need to find out exactly what Anthony hid with that horse. And pray it's enough, added Mrs. Eleanor, her gaze getting lost in the window where the first shadows of evening were beginning to form over Oakridge. The morning of the hearing dawned with a surprisingly clear sky over Oakridge. After days of low clouds and heavy atmosphere, the sun finally appeared, bathing the historic town with a golden light that seemed like a good omen. In front of the county courthouse, a small crowd was already forming. Residents, tourists, and especially employees and students from the Institute waited anxiously for the unfolding of events. The news that Anthony Sullivan would be brought for a decisive hearing had spread quickly through town, along with rumors about new evidence and potential twists in the case. What few people expected, however, was the presence of a horse. Sunshine arrived at 9:25, led by two court officers visibly uncomfortable with the unusual task. The animal, majestic in its golden coat that gleamed under the morning sun, remained extraordinarily calm despite the agitation around it. A ceremonial collar, different from the usual one, adorned its neck, an apparently insignificant detail that didn't escape Ryan's attentive eyes as he waited on the courthouse steps with Rebecca Morgan. "That's not the original collar," he whispered to the lawyer. "It was changed." "Are you sure?" asked Rebecca, tense. "Absolutely. I know every piece of Sunshine's equipment." Before they could discuss further, a murmur ran through the crowd. An official police car parked, and from it descended Anthony Sullivan, escorted by two officers. Despite days of confinement, the former director maintained the erect and dignified posture that had always characterized him. His face, although marked by fatigue, displayed a disconcerting serenity. When Anthony sensed the horse's presence, a slight smile appeared on his lips. Although he couldn't see the animal, he knew it was there from the crowd's murmur and the unmistakable sound of hooves against the stone pavement. "Can we approach?" Rebecca asked one of the officers. After a brief consultation on the radio, the man nodded. 5 minutes, no more, and no physical contact with the inmate. Ryan and Rebecca approached Anthony, who turned his face in their direction upon hearing their footsteps. "Ryan," he said, immediately recognizing the familiar sound of his former student's cane. "You came." "Of course I came," replied Ryan, emotional. "And I'm not alone. We found everything, Anthony. The documents in the safe, the files on the flash drive, the recordings." A shadow of concern crossed the former director's face. "And Sunshine? Did you manage?" "Yes," Ryan confirmed quickly. "But there's a problem. The collar was changed." Anthony remained motionless for a few seconds, as if processing the information. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "It doesn't matter," he said in a low voice. "Sunshine carries the truth with him, not just in his equipment." Before they could continue the conversation, they were interrupted by the call for everyone to enter the courthouse. The hearing was about to begin. "Do you trust me?" Anthony suddenly asked, his face turned in Ryan's direction. "With my life," the young man replied without hesitation. "Then, when the moment comes, approach Sunshine and look in his mane behind the right ear. And remember, light always comes from the east." With those enigmatic words, Anthony was led into the building. Ryan remained standing for a moment, trying to decipher the message until Rebecca called him back to reality. "Come on, we can't be late." The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Besides those directly involved in the process, various influential residents of Oakridge occupied the available seats. In the first row, Stephen Mitchell displayed a confidence that bordered on arrogance, flanked by two severe-looking lawyers. Sunshine's entrance caused a mixture of surprise and disapproval among those present. Judge Henry Campbell, a middle-aged man with an austere expression, observed the animal with perplexity. "I must remind everyone that this is a judicial hearing, not a circus," he commented dryly. "The defendant's unusual request was approved only due to exceptional circumstances, and the animal will remain only during Mr. Sullivan's initial testimony." Anthony was led to the witness stand, while Sunshine stayed near the entrance, guarded by a court officer. Rebecca took her place at the defense table beside her client. On the other side, the prosecutor nervously organized his notes. "Before we formally begin," announced the judge, "I would like to register the presence of Federal Bureau of Investigation representatives who requested to accompany this hearing due to developments related to ongoing investigations. All eyes turned to two men in dark suits sitting discreetly at the back of the room. Stephen Mitchell frowned, visibly disturbed by the information. The hearing began with the usual formalities. The prosecutor presented the charges against Anthony, detailing the alleged scheme of embezzlement from the Institute. Rebecca, in turn, kept surprisingly brief in her initial response, promising that the evidence would speak for itself. Then came the moment for Anthony's testimony. When invited to speak, he rose with dignity and asked to approach Sunshine before testifying. After a brief hesitation, the judge authorized it. Guided by an officer, Anthony walked to the horse. With delicate movements, he caressed the animal's neck, which remained perfectly still, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment. "This horse," Anthony began, his clear voice echoing through the silent room, "represents everything we've built at the Institute. The trust, the adaptability, the ability to overcome limits that many consider insurmountable." He paused, turning in the direction of the judge. "Just as Sunshine was trained to be my eyes in a world I cannot see, I dedicated my life to being a bridge between worlds for hundreds of people with visual impairments." From his place, Ryan closely observed every movement. He saw when Anthony, apparently in a casual gesture of affection, touched the area behind the horse's right ear, a discreet signal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Anthony continued, returning to Yi, the center of the room, "I am innocent of the charges brought against me. Not only that, but I was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy to remove me from the Institute and allow private interests to appropriate an asset that belongs to the community." The murmur in the room increased. Stephen adjusted himself uncomfortably in his chair. "As a man who has lost physical sight, I learned to see through other senses," Anthony proceeded, "and in the months preceding my arrest, I clearly perceived the shadows forming around the Institute. Therefore, I took measures to protect the truth." At that moment, the doors of the room opened and Lucy entered, accompanied by an elegant, middle-aged woman whom many immediately recognized, Claire Mitchell. Following them came Peter, accompanied by the farrier Jack. Ryan took advantage of the momentary distraction to approach Sunshine. Discreetly, following Anthony's instructions, he touched the horse's mane near the right ear. His sensitive fingers found something peculiar, a tiny metallic object interwoven in the hair, almost impossible to detect visually. Carefully, he extracted what appeared to be a small cylindrical capsule, the size of a rice grain. Inside, he could feel by touch, was an even smaller object. The judge, recovering from the surprise at the unexpected entrance, called the room back to order. "Ms. Morgan, what is the meaning of this interruption?" Rebecca promptly stood up. "Your Honor, I request permission to present crucial witnesses who have just arrived. Ms. Claire Mitchell possesses vital information about her brother Stephen Mitchell's financial activities, directly related to this." While the judge considered the request, Ryan discreetly returned to his place and handed the small capsule to Rebecca, whispering in her ear. The lawyer quickly examined the object, and her eyes widened in understanding. Additionally, Rebecca continued quickly, "Recovering, I would like to present recently discovered material evidence that definitively proves my client's innocence and identifies the true culprits behind the embezzlement." "Objection!" exclaimed the prosecution lawyer, rising abruptly. "We cannot accept evidence that appears in the middle of the hearing without proper due diligence." "Your Honor," Rebecca intervened calmly, "this evidence was literally under our noses the whole time. That's why my client insisted so much on having Sunshine present today." The judge, visibly intrigued, gestured for Rebecca to approach and present what she had discovered. She advanced and deposited the tiny capsule on the magistrate's bench. Inside this capsule, hidden in Sunshine's mane, is a microchip. On it are recorded all the banking transactions carried out by Stephen Mitchell using offshore accounts to receive bribes from contractors interested in the Institute's land. Furthermore, it contains a recording of a conversation where he explicitly admits to having falsified documents to incriminate Anthony Sullivan. The room erupted in exclamations of surprise. Stephen abruptly stood up, his face red with anger. This gear's absurd. A ridiculous setup, he shouted, completely losing his composure. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding silence. The court will take a 30-minute recess for this new element to be properly examined by the experts present, he announced, when he finally managed to restore order. And, he added, directing a severe look at Stephen, I request that Mr. Mitchell remain in the room, accompanied by court officers. As the room temporarily emptied, Ryan approached Anthony. How did you manage it? He asked in a low voice, amazed. Slight smile appeared on the former director's lips. Jack, he answered simply. The farrier is an old friend, and also an ex-IT technician who left Chicago looking for a simpler life. When I realized they were framing me, I asked for his help. He miniaturized the data and hid it in a way that no one would think to look for. Light always comes from the east, murmured Ryan, finally understanding. Sunshine, the sunrise. Exactly, confirmed Anthony. The sun rises in the east, bringing light upon darkness, and that's what sunshine did today. When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere was completely different. The experts confirmed the authenticity of the recordings and data contained in the microchip. Claire Mitchell presented additional documents she had recovered from the family house, proving Stephen's involvement in fraudulent schemes for years. The judge, after hearing all testimonies and analyzing the new evidence, not only acquitted Anthony of all charges, but ordered Stephen Mitchell's preventive detention for an impressive list of crimes. At the end of the session, while Stephen was led out in custody, casting furious glances at those present, Anthony remained seated calmly, his hand resting on Ryan's shoulder. It's over, said the young man, emotion making his voice tremble. No, Anthony gently corrected. It's just beginning. We have an institute to rebuild and a lot of work ahead. Outside the courthouse, the news was already spreading rapidly through town. Institute employees and students celebrated, some even crying with relief. Sunshine, the unlikely hero of the E. Day received affection from everyone who passed by, apparently indifferent to the importance of the role it had played. When the group finally left the building, they were greeted by applause from the gathered crowd. The sun, now high in the sky, intensely illuminated the scene, a symbolism not lost on Ryan. Light always comes from the east, he repeated to himself, looking at Anthony walking in front of him, free again. As they descended the courthouse steps, Lucy approached Ryan, discreetly taking his hand. What happens now? She asked in a low voice. Ryan smiled, gently squeezing her fingers. Now we rebuild, together. And so, under the clear sky of Oak Ridge, the group walked toward the future. A future where the truth, finally revealed, illuminated the path like the rising sun that, day after day, appears on the horizon, dissipating even the densest shadows.